Welcome to the Orange Water and Sewer Authority Board of Directors work session this Thursday, June 13, 2019. Does any board member know of any conflict of interest or potential conflict of interest with respect to any item on the agenda tonight? Okay, so we're going to have a change to our agenda. So without objection, a closed session has been added to the agenda for the purposes of discussing a personnel matter. We'll be having a new board member orientation, meeting 1. It'll be this Friday, June 21st at 8 a.m. in the OWASA boardroom. And does any board members have any announcements? Okay. Announcements by staff?
Yes, as a reminder, OWASA is hosting a meeting at the Cane Creek Community Center about our forest management work. We've had 34 people respond to the RSVP. We've also had 3 board members respond, and we certainly would expect some additional attendees that didn't RSVP. So, and we also understand there's a good bit of communications among neighbors and interested parties regarding this matter. So we do look forward to a very productive and spirited meeting next Thursday. Earlier this week, we met with 7 or 8 of the agencies, the subject matter experts, to help prepare for the meeting, and many of those will be in attendance, to observe and to answer questions and be a resource for us as we need it. And I know Ruth and Linda are meeting with folks with the Dispute Settlement Center that will help facilitate the small group meetings to try to set up an environment where everyone has an equal opportunity to speak and be engaged in smaller discussions before we reconvene into larger discussions. And I expect to email the board by close of business Monday the more detailed agenda and some of the draft slides that we're having the agencies review today and through the weekend. So it's still a work in progress in preparing, but we do look forward to a very productive meeting next Thursday, beginning at 6 p.m. at the Mapleview Agriculture Center, that is. And I'd also like to invite Vishnu Ganganaran, our engineering manager in charge of our capital improvement program, for an important introduction.
Vishnu Ganganaran, engineering manager for capital improvements. So I'm really pleased to introduce to the board tonight Coleman Ollinger. Coleman started with us on Tuesday as a utilities engineer, one of the 2 positions that have been vacant since early winter. And actually, we interviewed Coleman, I think it was back in February, and he was very upfront, I can't start until June, but we got through his interview and it was very clear that he was somebody that we wanted on the team. So he started with us on Tuesday. He brings a lot of good experience. He's got 9 years of experience, both consulting and municipal environments, including about 3 years doing capital project management for a water district in California. So really pleased to have him on the team, and without further ado, Coleman Ollinger.
Just wanted to say hello. I don't have a big speech or anything for you, but happy to be here. Just moved into town about a week and a half ago, and like Vishnu said, just started this week, so it's clear from a week. You got a lot going on, and got a really nice, well-oiled machine here, so looking forward to kind of becoming a part of that, applying whatever skill set I have to OWASA. Wow. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome.
You're welcome.
And the other good news to share is that last week we did get an acceptance of an offer for the 4th utilities engineer position. So at the next work session, I do expect to do another introduction. Well, actually, I will not be here. Mary will do an introduction. So we're really pleased to have both of those positions filled, because we do have a lot of work, and we're now going to be fully staffed. So thanks.
Does any board member have any additional comments, suggestions, or informational items? Okay. We'll be moving on to our consent agenda. Now, John Young, you did request for your resolution to be on the consent agenda, so I just wanted to make people aware that we're not going to be reading that out loud. There are 4 action items on the agenda, 3 resolutions, and 1 set of minutes. They are award the Dobbin Drive Water and Sewer Replacement Construction Contract, resolution honoring the services of John A. Young to the Chapel Hill, Carborough, Orange County community as a member of the Orange Water and Sewer Authority Board of Directors. Resolution to authorize the executive director to execute the Western Intake Partnership Memorandum of Agreement. Minutes of the April 25th, 2019 meeting of the Board of Directors. Does any member of the public wish to pull or have any questions about the consent agenda? Okay, board members have any questions or would like to pull?
I just had a comment. This relates to the Dobbins Drive project, page 1.3. I was really interested to read that the staff put together this bid invitation in a way that produced a really good bid. They put 2 projects together to make a more attractive package. They gave the contractor plenty of time to do the work and then built in some protection against unexpected risk that might be encountered. And so it worked, and the bid came in even below the engineer's estimate. Very good timing, given all the demands that are on our budget. So I really appreciate the creativity that the staff put into that and good thinking.
Anyone else have a question? Okay, may I have a motion and a second? Okay, motion made by Bob Morgan, second by Bruce Baum. All in favor? Aye. All opposed? Okay, thank you. So now we're moving on to our regular agenda. Agenda item, approval of the rates or schedule of rates, fees, and charges, annual budget, 5-year capital improvement program, cost of labor and merit increases. We have 4 resolutions. We don't have a presentation plan, but Steve is going to introduce these topics for us. Steve,
I think you can just about did everything that I wanted to say, but what Yinka and I had talked about earlier in the week is that you'll vote on the first 4 resolutions one at a time. There's one on the rates, the operating budget, and then there's 2 regarding the CIP program. And then after that, I'll introduce the merit pay increase subject. So, Yinka?
Okay. So our first one is the resolution adopting the schedule of rates, fees, and charges on or after October 1st, 2019. That begins on agenda 5.9. Regarding all of these resolutions, I wanted to see if there's any members of the public that needed to make a comment on them. Okay. Board member comments, questions regarding the resolution A.
I intend on voting for this item, but I still am against changing the rate on the 2 or 3 customers that we have that are getting the individual metering. Still think that's a cost of switching over to the AMI and hitting them with, I think it's doubling the fee, I think is too much, but that battle was lost a long time ago. But I still have reservations about that, but I fully intend to vote.
I have the same reservation.
First, I want to say thanks for including the information about the operating cost savings related to some of the other the projects like Agua Vista and energy management. And I hope that's perhaps now that's sort of baked into this version will be something that will be adopted in the future. I have 2 questions. Well, I'm curious if the Agua Vista savings how they compare to the original projections, knowing what we know today. And also, I think there was a question from board members about the CIP, the Capital Improvement Program, and whether we thought it was realistic given staffing outlook and so forth, and sort of the unexpected projects that are in our portfolio. So I didn't know if there had been any reconsideration of that, and maybe you could provide an update to the board. So there are two questions.
Todd, first, do you want to, there he is, address the AMI savings, and then Vishnu will address the execution of next year's proposed CIP.
As far as Agua Vista is concerned, we have hit all of the targets that we had set. The actual savings are a little murky right now because, as you remember, earlier this year we decided to preserve some of the positions that were to be eliminated in order to proceed with the valve exercising initiative that we've got going on right now. But as far as being on budget and all of the positions that were, supposed to be transitioned to other functions, that has all happened. And so, yes, we are on target with all that. And the project is in the process of closing out, and I was anticipating when that happens and we do see the actual, what we spent on it and everything, I would put out something to the board of the final status of all of that.
And with regards to the question about CIP execution, we did make changes, and that was part of the package that was part of the public hearing.
Okay.
So it's already included.
Yeah.
And this is the same package that's included tonight.
Right. Thank you, Vishnu.
Any additional questions? Okay, may I have a motion and a second to approve the Resolution A?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, motion made by Bruce Bohm, second by Ray DeVos. All in favor? Aye. All opposed? Okay. So now we're moving on to Resolution B, which is on agenda page 5.33. Resolution adopting the annual budget for Orange Water and Sewer Authority for the fiscal year July 1st, 2019 to June 30th, 2020.
So moved.
Okay. Any questions and stuff?
So I think this is where I have a question. I'm not sure which resolution, but I think it's this one. I know we approved the community engagement plan, the draft community engagement plan. But I had one question on the new position. I think it's like I don't remember the name of the position, but it's basically within the communications team, and it's for a new position for fiscal year 2020, and it's in this budget for a full-time position to support coordination and implementation of the communication plan, as well as daily operational communication needs throughout fiscal year 2020. I just thought that we would have that as a separate discussion item at a later date, because I just didn't think that was that much in the draft plan to really understand what this position is about. So for me, I wanted to know, is it normal to have a utility of this size to have two people in the communications sort of role? I don't know, it just seems like, to me, it seemed like maybe an extra position that I understand the community engagement plan was very thorough. It had quite a lot of things involved in it. And I know, I'm on board with that, but some of it that I think this position would be doing would be website design, and then a lot of it is daily communications. It just didn't sit right with me that was a full-time position. The website design I could see as hiring a specialist who does that, and that would make maybe more sense. I don't know. Basically, I wanted more discussion on that open position. It sounds to me like if we approve the budget as is, that position would just be folded in.
That is our intention, and that was part of the resource needs that we presented along with the communications plan. So for us to execute successfully the plan you approved, this is the resource we need. Linda, when she started, it was a reclass position, a higher level position. but all the duties, the day in, day out communication engagement duties that her predecessor did are still in play. Communication plans for every single capital improvement program, a lot of the work in the distribution and collection system with our cross-connection control, fats, oils, and grease control. So it's a full-time job just managing the day-to-day, if you will. And then given the bar that we've raised substantially with our communications engagement, you know, this position is absolutely needed. And again, it has been part of our resource plan when it was first presented.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it was only 2 paragraphs, or actually really 1 paragraph describing this open position in that draft plan. For me, I feel like there isn't enough there to, for me to understand exactly what this position would entail. That's just my thought.
Well, of course, we're happy to meet with you and talk about it some more, but it is absolutely needed to execute the communications plan.
Follow up on that?
Please.
It's a full-time,
Yes,
not
it's
a
a full-time
part-time?
permanent position.
So the one that's currently in there now is a volunteer on a temporary basis, part-time, couple of hours, is that correct?
Well, we have a number of interns. One's here tonight that's working with Mary Tiger. Linda, do you want to address what help you've been garnering along the way before we fill this position?
So Linda Lowe, Communications. I did have an intern. She was 1 day a week for a little while. And sorry, I just want to make sure, did you receive the sort of 1-page description that outlined the tasks and the percentage time this individual would be working on the different tasks?
Yeah, the board didn't, that wasn't in the package.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so this intern is no longer with the team. She graduated in May. But essentially, I think I can only reiterate what Ed was saying. The full-time operational communications needs that were being fulfilled by my predecessor, which includes providing support to, operations bulletins that go out when there are small or bigger line breaks, or supporting the needs of the engineering team when they do want to engage with the community. A small example is, you may be aware that we've started to do community construction briefings directly in the communities where events have happened. The last one we did was on Barclay Road. 20 people attended. We met them right at the site of the incident. I mean, maybe a few feet away. 20 community members attended. So, providing support to generate the communications around that kind of stuff takes time. But it's part of wanting to be more direct and engaging with the people we're serving. Before, we didn't do that kind of thing. So that's the kind of stuff that this additional role would support, the day-to-day, and then also helping to lift the communications like we already have been. As an example, the new water quality report card that got sent out, which I hope you all received a hard copy of. We've received 80 responses to the survey that we included on the back. That's unprecedented, really. That requires somebody to physically look at the hard copy. The back cover means they've read it from top to bottom, type in the URL, and answer those questions. That takes work. And of the 80 people that replied, one of the questions was, did you find this informative? 100% yes. And I think 79 of the 80 comments were very positive things like, I learned a lot from this, or I want to learn more about this. But it takes time to create those materials. And I don't think this organization had the capacity to do that before, to lift the communications to that level, if you will. But that's not sustainable without additional support. So that's a bit of a summary. I don't know if you want me to describe.
Well, you might say a little bit about, our work on the new website, and that there'll be ongoing need to keep that current and fresh, and as we move forward, and that's another new task for us.
So standard best practice in the world of websites is you can't put something up there and let it sit for 4 weeks if you want people to keep coming back for more information, engaging, entertaining, educational stuff, you have to freshen it up every week. So that takes time, right, to develop that content. So yes, we are investing in relaunching the site, working with an agency to do that, and that's a one-off investment. But to sustain it and maintain it and keep it at that good quality takes a resource, because I think we can all agree that the current site, because nobody has the capacity to maintain it, it looks dated. It's dated and it looks dated because nobody has had capacity to keep it at the quality that we want it at. I would say the new level of quality that we want it at. Any other questions or thoughts?
I guess my question would be, is it something that would require that sort of basically salary, that sort of level for the tasks that you've kind of identified?
Yeah. So Chair, I truly, truly believe in you get what you pay for. So if you want somebody that can write a good, so we're asking this individual to also be able to help lift and write good communications plans to engage with the community on things like Dobbins Drive, the big infrastructure project. That means being able to take a situation and understand, it's not just talking about the lane is going to be closed, but it's also talking about the contribution to the community, the economy, how it's going to help support and sustain the community and lift it, and how it benefits each individual overall. Our key message these days is investing in water, investing in infrastructure, is investing in the community. How many jobs is that thing generating? How many people are impacted? What's the lifeline, and how far down the road is that going to support the community? Needs somebody that can think farther and longer down the road when they're shaping that messaging, when they're shaping that plan, and not just let's send a letter to the neighbors, but what partners do we have to bring in this conversation? In what ways do we have to talk to them? Because if we invite them all for pizza at 6 o'clock, 2 people are going to show up. So do we go onto the street in their neighborhood? Yeah, that's probably going to work better. It needs somebody that can think at that level.
And Stephanie can provide more information on this. We use a model the consultant provided us in classifying the position and setting its pay grade. So it goes through the same model that every position in OWASA has gone through, the same model to make sure pay is equitable to different pay grades where there's different levels of responsibilities, education, experience requirements. So it went through the rigorous process Stephanie goes through with us and staff in making sure the position what's proposed is properly classified and pay grade set. And of course, I know Stephanie could tell you a lot more about that process if you want to learn about it.
No, I'm good.
Okay. Thank you, Linda. Okay.
Thanks, Linda.
So we had a motion. Can I have a second? Okay, so motion made by Bob Morgan, second by Jody Eimers. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Okay, thank you. Now we're moving on to Resolution C, which looks like two resolutions. So a resolution approving the capital improvement program and budget for fiscal year 2020 to 2024. And then capital project resolution for fiscal year 2020 infrastructure improvements. So the first one is on page 5.39. We'll split that one up. Any questions about that? Questions, comments by board members? Okay, may I have a motion and a second?
So move.
Okay, motion made by Ray DeBose, second by Bob Morgan. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Okay, thank you. And then we're moving on to the second one, which is the capital project resolution for the fiscal year 2020 infrastructure improvements. Any questions, comments about this one? Okay, may I have a motion and a second?
So move. I'll second.
Okay, motion made by Ray DeBose, second by Bruce Bohm. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Thank you. And then we're moving on to Resolution D, which is the resolution updating the schedule of employee classifications and authorized compensation, adjusting affected employees' compensation to the minimum of the pay range, and authorizing cost of labor and merit increase for eligible employees. Stephen, you're going to give us a brief update?
Sure. So this material, the material for this section begins on page 5.4. And a lot of it is a reproduction of what you considered at the last meeting at the public hearing. You'll remember that you were considering among 4 different options for cost of labor and then merit increase, the employee wages. After that meeting, you were involved in an email exchange where we developed an option 5, and that's presented on page 5.8. The difference there is, I think that we adjusted there. Option 4, I think, was the one that the board was kind of circling around and seemed to favor, and that the cost of that was a little bit less than what is in the budget already. And so option 5 essentially uses what was left in the budget from option 4 to increase the cost of labor adjustment. So you'll notice that the cost of labor for option 5, that adjustment's 1 3/4%, where in option 4 it's 1.3, and that's a little bit more closer to the a little further up in the range of the World at Work statistical data for cost of labor adjustment. So me or I or or Stephanie, we'd be happy to answer any questions, but leave it up to you guys to discuss.
Okay, thank you. Are there any members of the public that will wish to make a comment? Okay, board member comments and questions and discussion. John Young?
Well, I like option 5. I think I helped create option 4, and I really appreciate Ray's thoughtfulness in looking at option 4 and considering what it meant, you know, what was sort of the principles behind it, and improving it. I think he's, you know, his suggestion to, I think it's a worthwhile investment, the incremental amount to invest that into cost of labor increases, so that will help make us a better employer for future candidates we're trying to recruit, as well as it's a bump for the other employees. You know, I note the total increase is above what we're seeing in World of Work. The average, weighted average is 4.68, or the meets expectations is 4.05, and that's higher than the market, but I think it's a good investment, and I support it, and thank you, Ray, for thoughtfully developing it.
Bruce?
And I'd like to also say that I appreciate, Ray, you putting this together. In particular, we were looking at, I guess, 3 and 4. 3 would yield a number that's higher than our budget, and I feel very uncomfortable having 3 minutes ago approved the budget and now saying we're going to go higher than that. So for me, that would rule out option 3. I agree, because of the tightness of the labor market, we should go up to the budget that we have, and your option 5 provides that. So I would support that.
I'll support option 5 too. I was happy that the numbers worked out the way they did, that we were able to stay within the budget, but also increase the cost of labor from the 1 or 1.3 in the former options to all the way to 1.75. I think that's a significant benefit, raising all the pay ranges. I'm not sure I'm saying that right, Stephanie, but by a larger amount than what was proposed in the previous in the other options. There's on page 6.2, there's the yeah, 6.2, and I'm not sure how that works into the resolution. I'm still working on it, but it seemed like to me that the maximums look at the employer contribute. Oh, that's, I'm sorry, that's not, never mind. Never mind.
Any other questions? Lucia?
I'm coming into this a little bit sideways, but I don't know, the thing, but I guess two questions I have is for option 3, what happens if we go over the draft budget by that amount? Like,
Well, you'll recall that the budget, the total budget is around 24 million. And every year, you know, we'll budget X $100,000 for maintenance here or, you know, some other expense there. And we never hit that number exactly. Typically, except for this year, we come in just 1% or so underneath the budget, which $20 million is a significant amount. So for that amount of money, I would not suggest we change the budget that you just voted to approve. It would just be something that we'd monitor throughout the year. And if we ended up getting in, you know, on the wrong side of the budget, we would have to, you know, amend the budget like we did this year.
so in the end, it's not like a huge deal, it sounds like.
Yeah, I mean, if we hit every other expense item right on, yeah, we'd be over the budget by $28,000, but it's highly unlikely that, you know, that it would turn out that way. That $28,000 is not likely to be the thing that breaks us on the budget. It's more like going over $300,000 or $400,000 in chemical expenses like we did this year. That's the bigger problem.
Okay. So then my other question was really for option 5. I mean, if we go with option 5, the problem is that we're extending the time for that meeting the midpoint in the pay range. Is that correct?
Well, can I maybe take a stab at answering that? We are, for those employees who are at meets expectations for 7 years in a row, yes, it's a little bit longer time than we had talked about as a goal. For employees that kind of, you know, in our pay for performance system, for employees that kind of have a mix of performance ratings over those years, they would track to our goals in terms of how fast they would move up, progress through the pay scales. That's sort of the theory behind options 4 and 5. And, you know, in my mind, I think I used this terminology before. It's, you know, we came up with these policies, but they're a little bit in conflict with each other, because one of our policies is we're going to pay, we don't want to pay more than market rate increases, you know, the increases in the market. We don't want increases to be more than the market increases, because then our customers are bearing that cost, including our low income households. So that's another policy we have. So we can't make the puzzle work on all the dimensions. So when I proposed option 4, I felt it was a good compromise of all of the policies that we have in effect right now.
And then John Morris and Bob Morgan.
Thank you. I really appreciate the work that John and Ray did on this. I think I'm inclined to support option 5. I just had one comment. Some of the bullets down below that make observations about it sort of sounds like this is not a very good proposal. It says the cost of labor is at the lower end of the world at work range. Okay, that's true, but if you look at the world of work total increases, all of our increases are substantially above that. Some of them way above it. So this is, I think we want to do this, but this is a generous pay raise compared to what the world of work shows. So I don't think we have to apologize for this.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I think that's an important point, John. I think our messaging, you know, this is a really healthy pay increase for our employees, and yet we're positioning it as having flaws. And I think that's the wrong message to take to our employees, you know, because we value them and we're showing it here, and yet it's not positioned that way. Thank you.
And only point I wanted to add that may address Rashir's concern for those who meet expectations. I think with the higher market increase from a salary standpoint, it makes up a little bit for that. And it certainly makes us more competitive across the whole organization and in the marketplace. So I also support option number 5.
Hey, Jody, you have any comments?
Yeah, I would simply say I support option 5 for the reasons enumerated.
And John Cooley, I know you're new. Any questions?
No questions.
So I know for me, John Young, you raised a good point with, I'm kind of conflicted with, number one, I know I don't want option 3. We just approved a budget that is going to be increasing our community members' fees and rates for services. So I think option 3 would be a little bit reckless in that regard of we've just approved 5% increase and then going forward with the other budgets, which we don't know, those also have 5% increases over several years. I did like option 4 because it is a cost saving, but also more in line with what our surrounding communities are having as their pay increases overall. Even some of ours are a little bit higher if you're doing the exceptional. If you're looking at, I think it was Orange County, the town of Carborough, the town of Chapel Hill, all of those were in the 3% range for what people's pays are gonna be. So that's why for me, I was leaning more towards option 4 because it's just a little bit better than what our surrounding neighbors are doing. Option 5 is okay, but it's still, again, we just did a 5%, we just approved the 5% increase. So I just feel like the message it's sending is sort of different to our public. Yeah, so we need a motion, at least for, to choose which option we'd like.
I move that we adopt option 5.
Okay. Okay, so motion made for option 5 by Bob Morgan, second by John Morris. All.
So the motion would be to adopt the resolution, showing the package.
That's exactly what I meant.
Thank you.
Okay, so we have a. Okay, so, all in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Aye. So that motion passed with the resolution for option number 5. And we're moving on to agenda item number 6, which is the Human Resources Committee recommendations for the Retiree Health Insurance Benefit and Deferred Compensation 457. And Stephanie, you're going to give us a brief update on the deferred compensation first?
Mm-hmm. We're talking about retiree health benefits.
Retiree health, I'm sorry.
Thank you so much. So back in 2014, a consultant analyzed OWASA's compensation and benefits to determined that the retiree health benefits were above market and our deferred compensation 457 plan was below market. The board requested that the Human Resource Committee analyze these two benefits and make a recommendation to the full board. For the retiree health benefits, which we'll talk about first, OWASA currently pays a percentage of the premium for those that are pre-65 retirees and stay on the OWASA health insurance plan, and also that same percentage for those over age 65, the premium for the Medicare supplement. Those percentages are determined by the years of service and the age at the time of retirement, and you can see that there on your screen what those percentages are. Part of the committee's work included studying data from our peer organizations, and you can find that data on page 6.5 of your agenda. The recommendation put forth by the Human Resources Committee is as follows: continue the current retiree health benefits for all current employees. As of a future date, provide new employees with a retirement health savings plan. This plan is an investment plan. It is meant as a savings for future medical expenses, such as premiums and out-of-pocket expenses while in retirement. Should an employee leave OWASA, the plan is portable and it goes with the employee. With the retirement health savings plan, employees would contribute 2% of their salary up to $1,000 per year, and OWASA would contribute $35 per pay period, and there would be a maximum contribution of $1,910. The committee is recommending that after this predetermined date, that the current benefits would not be offered to new hires, and any existing employees would not be eligible for the new retirement health savings plan. As you can see from the chart, costs would decrease long-term, but they would increase short-term. That would be that $35 per pay period. At that meeting in March, when this was presented from the committee to the board, it was determined that we would seek employee feedback before the board voted on the recommendation. I held several open meetings with employees. I sent out the presentation I used at that meeting to all OWASA land users, so every employee had the opportunity to provide feedback to me on this. And here are their comments. So there was overall general support of the recommendation, and employees really did, with our diversity and inclusion efforts, were really happy and excited that they got to be included and provide feedback. So that went over very well. Most employees understood the need to reduce benefits because of those future costs, and they were grateful that their benefits would remain intact. Some did ask if they could choose between what they have currently and what the retirement health savings account would provide. There was concern that $1,910 invested annually would not cover any future medical costs. They also asked if they could keep their current benefit and participate voluntarily in the retirement health savings account without the employer contribution. There were some employees that felt asking a new employee to contribute 2% over their current required 6% for their local government retirement system was just a bit too much. And some suggested that the employer contribution be adjusted annually with the board-approved cost of labor adjustments by the same percentage. So on page 614, you will find a draft resolution accepting those Human Resource Committee's recommendations and allowing the executive director to determine that effective date. And of course, I think I'm going to turn it back over to the board chair for discussion, and I'm here to answer any questions.
Okay. Are there any members of the public that will wish to make a comment? Okay, board member comments, questions. Bob Morgan, and then Ray, and then Bruce.
Going to the employees' questions, whether they can belong in both of them, and I don't think the programs will allow you to belong to both of them, would they?
When you say allow them to have the retirement health savings account and the current one that we have, we've not had any indication that they could not belong to both.
Okay, I thought we talked about that. There was another one.
I did remind employees that, they have the opportunity to contribute money into a current 457 plan if they wanted to use that for future medical expenses.
Did the employees look at this as covering medical expenses or going towards health insurance premiums?
Both. They understood that in the future, when you're retired, you can use it for anything that wouldn't be covered, an eye exam, something like that, or you could use it towards premiums.
Okay. All right. And I would just add, I think this proposal is good. I think in the long term, it's wise to go back with the marketplace and color costs long range. And then I think one of the things that just recently kind of struck me was this being portable. And, you know, a lot of people stay 5 years and go someplace, you can take this with you. And I know I worked for Farborough for 19 years, and I lost the benefit, my retirement health insurance benefit, by moving. So this would have been really nice if I could take that with us. So I think for the employee, it has a lot of positives, and we're not hurting anybody who's in the existing system.
Ray and then Bruce?
So I really like the suggestion that the $35 employer contribution be adjusted annually with the cost of labor. But there's a couple other limits if you go back a couple of slides. There's a $35, there's $1,000, and there's a $1,910. Should those be increased by the cost of labor every year so that there's not a decline based on the actual
So you would
set
suggest,
maximum?
with whatever the board approves for cost of labor, that be included in the employer and the employee contribution, because and then the 1910 would automatically move up.
Yeah, I mean, there was a concern about the 1910 may not cover future costs, but if we escalate it based on something, and the something that we've tied the other to was the cost of labor, so shouldn't we, what do you think? I mean, is that a good idea?
I do think that would be a good idea.
That way we won't have to revisit it every year, and it is escalating some. I mean, we're gonna have to make adjustments over time, I think.
I certainly understand that. The $35 is the employer contribution. I just want to make it clear that you would expect the employees to also increase that 2% of their contribution every year.
Well,
okay.
Yeah, it would remain 2%, but I guess the up to
The
1,000
maximum
would be inflated, right?
The maximum would change.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Bruce?
Yeah, the mandatory part would stay the same.
Okay. That's what I wanted to make sure I understand.
Yeah, two questions. One was just answered by the escalation numbers we talked about. The other one was on Appendix B, which is the graph. What happens in year 10 I understand that initially it will cost more, but then it'll drop back. What happens in year 10 that causes that sharp bend?
Unfortunately, the retirees that are under our current plan would no longer would be deceased.
But they don't all die in year 10.
No.
That's a gradual process.
You could put that in the motion, I suppose. No, we just made some assumptions about the rate at which people would no longer be around to collect the benefits, and I don't recall now off the top of my head. I think it may have been in a human resource packet at one time, but we just made some assumptions that at that point, people would start to no longer be eligible. Why that's so sensitive to that.
There are friends and coworkers.
I did have a question. So that maximum, was that the maximum that's just set by the retirement health itself, or that's just the maximum?
That would be set by OWASA. And I think the committee, there are two other organizations that do this, the town of Chapel Hill and Durham. And that's both where they both have it set at those numbers. And I think the committee was just in line with what the peers were doing.
John Young?
Yes, thanks. I endorse the idea, and I'm glad someone raised it about adjusting all of the fixed dollar amounts to be adjusted by the cost of labor. And so I would suggest whoever makes a motion that we include that amendment. And the resolution does include the $1,910. So all three of the numbers would have to be adjusted. Right. I was going to ask about the allowing current employees to contribute on a voluntary without the company match. I think you raised a good argument. There are other, even probably more flexible types of programs, and maybe that wouldn't be the first thing. And then I thought, well, on the other hand, some employees may be maxed out on those other types of programs and might appreciate the opportunity to kind of add on to the, 457 contributions, let's say. Is there any?
We don't have anybody that's that.
Okay. All right. That's fair enough right there. Then I think that's it. And I appreciate that. Just a comment. When we do the cost of labor adjustments, I'm afraid that line will look different. It might not even start coming down. It might actually never cross the black line. It'd be interesting to see how that works, but I suspect that might be the case for building in some inflation. But lastly, I appreciate the employees, the process that you went through to kind of collect employee feedback, and I valued the feedback that we received from employees. Thanks to everyone.
And I would comment if the board does choose to support the change and with the change discussed, seeing it on the screen as what employees said, I think that would be a real powerful message. Sometimes it won't be that way, but we know you always listen, carefully consider, you ask good questions, and have had a long track record of support. So thank you for acknowledging that. And of course, Stephanie did a great job inviting the feedback and summarizing it here. So
I did have one more question. This would be for board members, and even you, Stephanie. Did we discuss the option for employees to choose if they wanted to do the new health retirement savings, or that option was not available? I couldn't remember.
That option was not available per the committee's recommendations.
Okay.
We discussed it though.
Right, because I was trying to think of picking the best of both plans that we didn't want that.
I remember discussing that, but we landed here, and I can't give you all the reasons why.
Right, I remember. Yeah.
Because that was a long time ago.
It's more expensive. That was one factor. I mean,
okay,
because the employees that will get the most benefit by doing that will do it, and those who would get the
that's right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Those who would get the least benefit by doing it won't do it, and will, so we wind up. Unfortunately, I mean, I appreciate that input from the employees, but that turned out to be a pretty costly scenario, I think.
And my second question, we haven't determined the date. When will we determine the date?
So the resolution says that you would authorize the executive director to choose that date, and it has to be before December 31st. Okay. So we would work with the provider of the retirement health savings account. They've already sent me some example copies of a contract, et cetera. And so, we just have to nail those things down and get that started.
Any additional questions, comments? Okay, so the resolution would be 6.11 to 12, which is updating the human resource policy to change the retiree health benefits for new hires. May I have a motion? Oh.
Yeah, I move the.
I think it's the resolution on 6.14, is it not? Regarding retiree health insurance benefits for new hires. And we may have the information wrong in your notes. Apologize for that. And then if you decide to make a motion, go ahead. Sorry.
It's on 6.11. What did you say, Ed? I think.
There are two. I'm sorry. Yeah, there are two. First, yeah.
So we're doing
my
these.
Apologies.
I think we're just talking about retirement.
Retiree health.
Yeah. So I'd like to. I make a motion to adopt the resolution on 6.11 and 6.12 with an amendment that each of the fixed dollar amounts be adjusted by our annual cost of labor increases. Is that sufficient, Bob? Is a clear motion?
Yeah.
Andy will make sure that's what it is. No, I just wanted to make sure Andy understood. Yes, go.
May I have a second?
Second.
Okay, so motion made by John Young, second by Ray DeBose. All in favor? Aye. All opposed? Okay. And now we're moving on to the second portion of that, which is the deferred compensation benefits for employees and their comments.
Okay. So, up on the screen are our current deferred compensation 457 plan benefits. The employer contribution begins with 4 years of service and increases as an employee reaches milestones in tenure. Beginning with the 4 years, OWASA contributes $40 per pay period, then $60, then $80, and then $100 per pay period. Again, part of the committee's review included information from our peer organizations on what they provide to their employees for deferred compensation. You can find it on the screen as well as on page 6.9 in your agenda packet. The committee is recommending that 1, benefits begin at the date of hire. The employer contribution be 3% of wages or $1,300 per year, whichever is greater. There would be no requirement for an employee contribution. And current employees would have the option to stay with the current benefit or move to the new percentage of wages benefit. And the annual contribution of $1,300 would be adjusted annually by that same percentage that the board approves for cost of labor adjustments. The cost of our current benefit has been about $200,000, and with this recommendation, should you approve it, it would increase our costs by about $70,000 or so in the first year. I did talk to employees about this as well, and they were excited about the benefit improvement, and they were very appreciative. They did ask if they could elect one of the 2 plans and then change their mind later. For the most part, they supported it beginning with the date of hire to be in line with the other entities, and there were a few that thought it should begin after the 6-month probationary period. They did point out that those with higher salaries would receive more of a contribution, and they were curious as to how the committee determined the 3%, because they felt like maybe that was still a little bit below market. And of course, they did see the benefit in this for attracting, qualified new hires. On page 613, there's a draft resolution should the board accept the committee's recommendations. And we suggest a September 1st start date with about 30 days for current employees to elect which plan they would like to be on. And of course, I'm here to answer any questions that you have, and I'll turn it back over to the board chair.
Okay. Are there any members of the public that will wish to make a comment? Okay, board member comments and questions. Bob?
I would just ask the question, the second question, could you elect and then change your mind? I don't think that's possible, is it, under the program?
That would be very difficult.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
I suggest giving them 30 days to decide if they need to go home and talk to their loved ones at home on, or come to HR and find out maybe what plan would be in their best interest. We'd like to give them, about 30 days to do that.
And the point about those with higher salaries receive more contribution money. That's why we gave the either or option from the HR committee standpoint. And the 3%, this is a start, and future boards can consider rate increasing it over time. But I think this is a good approach. I think the HR committee felt the same way, that this was a good approach to getting this into market and making the transition.
Bruce?
I also think it's a good plan. I appreciate the time and thought that went in and getting the employee feedback on it. One thing I do have sympathy with is the notion of having some period of time that has to elapse before the program kicks in. You know, occasionally mistakes happen on either side with a hire. I have no problem with when it kicks in being retroactive to the hire date, but it reduces administrative costs, excuse me, somewhat to have that trial period, maybe at 6 months or a year. So I would support in the private company world, it's called a cliff period, but support that notion. So the employee has to be employed by OWASA for 6 months or a year, whatever the cliff period is, for their eligibility to kick in. And when it does, the numbers are reflective of the contributions beginning on the date of hire. Yeah, retroactive. Right.
John Young?
Yeah, another way to say that is it vests over the 6 months from 0 to 100% all at once. And I like that idea. Thank you.
Yeah, we talked about this, and I can't remember why we didn't do this, but I like the idea now too.
Well, we didn't have the retroactive part of it. That's,
Oh, that was
Right,
why.
that-
yeah, that's the new element. That-
The only thing that bothers me about that, having experienced that at the beginning of my career, is that after 6 months, you typically get your probationary increase and you end up with less money. Because, well, that was with the retirement system. This may not be the same thing, but hey, you got to pay a raise and you're going to get less money. And that's why I pushed to have it on the starting date. And that's what I would like.
And I recall that the committee discussed that our peer organizations, all but one, start at higher date. And it is an investment program. And so if you give everybody money that they should have been putting in investments starting on day one, they may feel like they've lost out on investing that money.
I don't understand the mechanics there on the 6 month anniversary. Why would you get less money then?
Well, that was very. Thank you. I was working for the city of Durham, and they didn't start the retirement system until you were there for 6 months, and that's when you got your probation increase at 5% typically. And the retirement system at that time was like 6 or 7%. So you never saw that pay increase and basically neutralized each out, which would not happen in this situation because of the percentages that we're talking about. But you reminded me that I don't think you can go retroactive because of the way the system's set up. Because they're getting money taken out in order to have it after 6 months, and then they've lost that investment unless you put it in while you're going through that 6 months.
I think OWASA would just accrue that 6 month dollar amount, and if the employee's there on 6 months and 1 day, that money goes into their account. And if they're not there, then the money goes back to OWASA. So they don't see any difference in their paycheck, and
They would only miss out on the investment opportunity for that 6 months.
Yeah.
That's what I think.
You said it much better than I did, Michelle.
Well, but OWASA may put that money into an equivalent account. I don't know how complicated we want to make it, but it could be completely transparent.
There's another element to it, which is the voluntary employee contributions, which right now started day one.
Yes.
Yeah, and so I don't know that there's any reason not, I'm just trying to lay out all the details. So if we're going to make a change that we sort of think through them. And so that would be one is, would we be okay with those voluntary employee contributions occurring on the first day?
I know with the 457 plan, the money that's in there is theirs, so whatever OWASA is putting in belongs to them at 100%. And I know I raised this up of one is automatically vested, so they automatically get it, whether they're here 3 months, 4 months, 4 years, whatever it is, but whatever money that we've already contributed is theirs, and there's no guarantee that they're gonna stay with the organization. I did like to have it after a probationary period that they get some money, but I think because we were looking at these, even some of these is not necessarily accurate because the 401k can still have a employer vesting where they can get the money or not get the money if they're not there after a certain period of time. But with the 457 plan, that's a totally different one, and I'm not seeing any that's listed there that has a specific 457 plan that says at hire on that. So that was my concern with at hire.
So I think what Nika's asking, I think what you're saying is that when you're saying this deferred compensation and effective date, you're talking about the employer contribution, right? So I think
they get it at higher, right? But we don't know if they have a vesting period where it says you have to be with the company 1 year, 2 years before you see 100% of what the employer has contributed.
We're not aware of any vesting periods. It's an employee-owned plan. So we're not aware of anybody that you see on the screen that has a vesting period.
So like Town of Chapel Hill with their 401k, that's totally separate from a 457.
Mm-hmm.
So with the employer contribution, we don't know, or have they said that there's no vesting, they just get it at 100% from date of hire?
Yes, that's our understanding.
Diane?
I do remember now a conversation at the HR committee meeting, and Bruce, it would go against this concept. It was that when we're recruiting employees, we'd rather sort of present a simple offer and not have to get into the footnotes of the discussion. And so in this situation, we'd have to say, well, there's this great 457, or I'm sorry, 401k, 457 plan that you'll get this benefit. Oh, but we have to tell you that you won't get anything for 6 months. It's vested, blah, 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 you know. And so it's just a more complicated conversation when you'd rather be talking about the exciting work that they're going to be doing.
And we encourage them to start their own contributions at higher.
Yeah. So that, as I think about that, again, I think I'm going to, I advocate for just the simple, and I'm looking at this list here of everyone else. Maybe I'm back on the keep it at higher.
But right now it's at 4 years. So.
Oh yeah, it just went right out. And it was really good too. I'll come back.
We'll wait.
You guys go ahead. We'll come back.
Anyone else has something?
Oh, right. So when is this become like it automatically defaults that they have some sort of contribution level on the employee side?
There's no mandatory employee contribution.
Well, not mandatory, but I mean a default, like, okay, we set up your salary defaulted at 5% going to this plan. You can always opt out. I mean, that's something that I think we really should consider, because there's been a lot of studies about employers who do that, where it's a default setting where the 457 is automatically contributed from the employee side as well as the employer side. If it's a default setting, people just don't think about that as their salary. It's just automatically kind of out of sight, out of mind. Versus having to actually physically volunteer it, it's much more difficult to really get employees to do so, especially lower paid employees. So I don't know if, I'm guessing it's not exactly part of this conversation, but I think it should be. If not here, or maybe somewhere other, I don't know if it needs to be a board decision for that, but I really would strongly suggest making that a default contribution.
And we had discussed that at the HR committee meeting of having them have to opt out physically, but I forget the argument of why we didn't bring that up. But I remember it was, well, I know I brought it up, but I don't remember what the response was of why we don't want to have that.
Well, I think it's the issue with, we're already going to have a mandatory 2% on the retirement health insurance. You have another mandatory, say 2% from the employees for this. The pay raise that they just got is pretty well wiped out.
Right, but it wouldn't be mandatory. This would be just a default.
Default means you kick it in whether they want it or not, right?
No, but
No, they have to opt out. They have to say, I don't want.
I'm again more for simplicity.
Well, there is a mandatory contribution to the regular retirement system.
6%.
6%, so that's off the salary.
Oh, maybe that's why we decided. No, I forget.
Yeah.
What was this again? Say that again?
There's a mandatory 6% contribution from each employee to the regular retirement system.
The state one.
This is, this 450,
right.
yeah, this 457 is supplementary.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
That's why. Now I remember this.
The employee and OWASA contribute to the local government retirement fund.
Right. Okay.
And that's on top of Social Security, right?
Right.
Right. Yeah, so I was kind of an advocate for the opt-out kind of scenario, but when you consider that they're already committing 6% involuntarily, that seems.
Any other discussion, feedback? Okay, so the resolution is on page 6.13, which is to amend the deferred compensation benefits. So may I have a motion in a second?
And as Stephanie mentioned there for the last whereas, you were suggesting September 1st?
I was suggesting September 1st.
And then 30 days, right? If the motion included that, that'd be great.
Can I have a question? Sorry, the 30 days, actually, that was another thing in the back of my mind was, it seems really short to me. Can it, I was thinking 60 days would make more sense for me, but.
Sounds good to me.
Okay.
Okay, so it's 60 days. So motion made by Bob Morgan, second by Jody Eimers. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Okay, thank you.
Okay. Next little piece of business is that if you'll turn your attention to page 6.11, with all of these changes that you have made, we need to change our human resource policy. That's something that only the board can do. Staff can't go in there and just make changes to it. And so if you'll see, it's got information there, and I don't know if it's showing up in red on your screens or not, but it shows you the language that needs to be deleted and the language that needs to be included. And so we would need to have a motion on that HR policy, of course, as amended by the resolution. Can we say it that way, Bob?
Okay. So that'd be Appendix D. And I think on my copy, it starts on page 6.10.
Yes, I'm sorry.
Okay.
So
Appendix D shows you what's in the resolution on 611.
Okay. So that would be the policy that we have written along with the resolutions that we just passed for the increase for inflation and then the dates that are listed for the to be determined dates.
So
The motion would be to adopt the resolution found on page 6. With the amendments as shown, right.
Can I have a second?
I'm a bit confused because the first motion I made, and maybe it was improper, wasn't it 611 and 612?
I actually marked it on page 611 and 612, but I think I marked 6.11.4.
Yeah, and now I apologize.
She got it on the right page. I had it on the wrong page back front.
Yeah, 6.14 is just about who are, okay. So I think I specifically said, for whatever it's worth, I said 611 and 612, so I'm.
She marked it on the right page.
Okay, it was understood by everyone that we were voting on that? That's the question.
Yeah, I hope so.
And.
Yeah, we corrected the page it was on, because I originally said 6.11 to 12 based on my notes, but it was corrected to the 614 for the, what's that? The retiree health one was on 614, the first motion we made.
Okay. Sorry. Just make sure we got everything covered, that's all.
And then 613 was the deferred compensation.
Right.
And so now the changes would be on 611 to 612, the resolution adopting those changes
Right, in the policy.
in the policy.
Yeah. And what I have a note that Mr. Morgan made a motion and
We're looking for a second, yes.
I'll second.
Okay, so motion made by Bob Morgan, second by John Young. All in favor? Aye. All opposed? Okay, thank you.
I'd just like to say thank you so much for all the board members, past and present, who have worked on these two items.
I was going to say this is quite an accomplishment and a great way to go out, to be honest, because we've been working on this one for like 6 years and board members have come and gone in that time and wow, we finally made it. Yes. I don't think that was by accident. You wanted to make sure you didn't have to start over with a whole new crop, right?
thank you for your support.
So now we're moving on to our next agenda item, which is monitoring compounds of emerging concerns, updates and discussion. We have two people, Katie Harold, you're going to start us off, and Monica Dotson.
Hi, I'm Katie Harold, Laboratory Supervisor at the Water Treatment Plant, and I'll be starting, and as Yinka said, Monica will be wrapping up. So we're presenting on monitoring of compounds of emerging concern. Our key points are that OWASA's drinking water is safe and meets all federal and state regulations, as well as health advisory levels, which are non-regulatory where available. OWASA participates in the EPA program for monitoring unregulated compounds. We support regional and national research, including unregulated compounds, and we invite our customers to contact us with any questions or comments. To start us off, I want to go over a few things because this is a little bit of a longer presentation than normal. It's going to run about 30 minutes. I want to give some background information. So the major players that we're going to be talking about in this presentation at the federal level is the EPA, which has regulatory oversight and does perform or request monitoring. At the state level, the Division of Water Resources has primacy from the EPA, so they also have regulatory oversight and they also perform a fair amount of monitoring. The North Carolina Pfs Testing Network was legislatively mandated by the North Carolina legislature. They are performing monitoring and also research. And at the local level is OWASA. We are performing monitoring. We also participate in federal and state monitoring and remain abreast of latest guidance. I also want to go over some units of measure for context. So 1 part per trillion is equivalent to 1 grain of sand in an Olympic-sized swimming pool. 1 part per million is equivalent to 8 drops of water in an Olympic-sized swimming pool. And 1 part per million is equivalent to a teaspoon in an Olympic-sized swimming pool. So what are unregulated compounds and compounds of emerging concern? There's thousands and thousands of compounds present naturally and synthetically, and these can be found in the environment. Only a very small subset of these compounds are regulated, and as technology improves, we are able to better measure some of these compounds, more compounds at lower and lower levels. Just because a compound can be detected and measured doesn't necessarily mean that it is harmful or that it is present at harmful levels. In this presentation, we're mostly going to be talking about per and polyfluoroalkyl substances, also known as PFAS, as well as 1,4-dioxane. These compounds are the focus of this presentation because they have been detected in North Carolina and have been focus of some interest. So how does a compound go from being regulated or unregulated to regulated by the EPA? The EPA maintains a list of compounds of interest. This list is published and periodically updated, prioritized, et cetera. Compounds can spend quite a long time on this list. They can be removed from the list, added back in. Based on the prioritization, the EPA then selects a subset of these compounds to evaluate to determine if they want to move forward with regulation. This evaluation includes assessing health risks, occurrence levels, and the opportunity for reduction of risk. These three pieces are really important. There needs to be a health risk for the compounds. Just because they're of interest doesn't necessarily mean there's a health risk. So they look at all of the available research. They may also request additional research. They need to perform occurrence data. So right now I'm focusing on drinking water. Compounds need to occur at a fairly common level. The way the Safe Drinking Water Act is written, compounds need to be found fairly regularly to be eligible to be regulated under the Safe Drinking Water Act, and that's because they don't want the Safe Drinking Water Act used to address contamination that would be better handled under things like Superfund, right? We don't want to just target a compound that is only found in one specific spot using the Safe Drinking Water Act that applies to everyone. And there also has to be a meaningful opportunity for reduction of risk, meaning that these compounds need to be found in drinking water and that there needs to be a usable treatment technique that's available to remove these compounds, and that the compounds, the exposure through drinking water needs to be a major route of exposure compared to other routes of exposure. So once the EPA has completed their evaluation, the final step is that they decide whether or not they want to move forward with regulation. That's not actually doing the regulation, that's doing the regulatory determination, which is saying, yes, we are going to pursue regulating this compound, or no, we are not. Even if they decide that they're not going to regulate a compound, they can still set a health advisory level, which is non-regulatory, but provides a lot of guidance to utilities, states, and other entities. So as I said, one of the compounds we're going to be talking about are PFAS, or per and polyfluoroalkyl substances. These compounds are found in a whole host of different applications, including in our homes. They are a huge family of compounds. There's at least 5,000 identified compounds at this point, and new ones being added all the time. These compounds are used because they are resistant to water and to stains. So they're used in our homes, and they're also used in industrial applications for things like reducing friction, reducing dust formation, etc. They are also used in firefighting foam that is used specifically for very high heat fires, such as jet fuel and other petroleum-based fuels. And these are all synthetic compounds. They don't naturally occur. We make them. I don't, but humans. And because it's such a broad group of compounds, I just want to provide some context on how they can be grouped. So there's two major ways that these compounds are grouped, either by size or by their chemistry. So shown here are two example compounds, PFOS and PFBA. PFOS is an 8-carbon chain. Each of those little X's is a carbon, so there's 8 of them. And then it's got a functional group on the end. And PFBA is a 4-carbon chain. So that's a short chain, and it has a different functional group on the end. So they have different chemistries. They can kind of be grouped by either long chain or short chain and by their chemistries, but they do behave in very different ways. And that is part of the challenge. They have been in use for quite a long time. They were originally invented in the 1930s. They've been in production since the 1940s. And they are, there's a huge number of different kinds of compounds. So how do these compounds end up in the environment? They are all produced initially in industrial settings. They're manufactured. They are also used in industrial manufacturing. And then they can have direct release into the environment. They can be released via air deposition. They also, they are used in manufacturing and in household products and, manufacturing products. So eventually those products end up in a waste stream, whether that's solid waste that ends up in a landfill or some kind of liquid waste that will end up eventually at a wastewater treatment plant. These compounds do travel through those waste streams because, I don't think I mentioned this earlier, the carbon-fluorine bond is very, very strong. So these compounds are kind of considered forever chemicals. They don't break down. They can do some chemistry, but they basically end up in a terminal form, and they are very, very hard to destroy. So eventually they will make their way through one of those waste streams, and they can end up in the environment through them. And if they're used as firefighting foam directly in the environment, that can be another pathway. So what is the regulatory timeline for these compounds? Beginning in 2006, the EPA formed the PFOA stewardship program with the major manufacturers of these long-chain perfluorinated compounds in the U.S. Although it's called the PFOA stewardship program, it did focus on the three major long-chain compounds that were in use at the time, being PFOS, PFOA, and PFNA. That was completed in 2015, at which point the production and use was phased out. While it was ongoing, the EPA issued a provisional health advisory level for two of these compounds, PFOS and PFOA, which were the most prevalently used. By a provisional health advisory, the EPA was saying that they reserved the right to go back and revise that as more data was available, although health advisory levels can always be revised. While that was going on, they also, in UCMR 3, had utilities collect occurrence data for 6 of these compounds in drinking water. UCMR is the program by which the EPA collects occurrence data for these compounds. They have utilities collect samples and monitor for them. So based on that data and other data, the EPA did update that health advisory level. So it went from being 400 for 400 parts per trillion and 200 parts per trillion for PFOA and PFOS respectively, to a summed level of 70 parts per trillion for those two compounds. And that arrow just indicates that at this point that is what guidance is available, but it could change, right? We're still in 2019. We do expect that the EPA will be issuing a regulatory determination for these two compounds by the end of 2019, which means that the EPA will be letting us know if they intend to pursue regulatory limits for those two compounds. While that is expected by the end of 2019, the EPA is continuing to investigate other perfluorinated compounds and may make future regulatory determinations for other compounds. UCMR 4 is ongoing right now. I'm not going to focus on that because it is not relevant to perfluorinated compounds. It's focused on other compounds. And EPA has also said that beginning in 2023, they intend to include other perfluorinated compounds in drinking water. So again, water utilities will be collecting samples and measuring occurrence data for these compounds in drinking water. The EPA issued an action plan for PFAS in February 2019, and it has 7 different parts that I'm going to go through. For drinking water, as we just discussed, they are proposing to issue a regulatory determination for those two compounds, PFOS and PFOA, and they're continuing to gather information to determine if regulation is appropriate for a broader class of PFAS. They are intending to include better repeat monitoring and more intensive monitoring for other perfluorinated compounds in the next cycle of UCMR, which will improve our data on the frequency and levels of perfluorinated compounds in drinking water. They're also continuing to expand the scientific foundation that is available for understanding and managing risks from PFAS. This includes improving detection and measurement methods, treatment technologies, and remediation methods. And I want to emphasize one of those pieces, which is working on the measurement methods. At this time, there is only an approved method for 18 PFAS compounds in drinking water. There is no approved method for other matrices, such as wastewater. And when labs, such as the lab we're using, do measurements for compounds beyond those 18 compounds, they are using modified methods. They're also improving risk communication by creating a risk communication toolbox, which can be used by states and other entities to help ensure clear, consistent messages to the public. They're considering adding PFAS to the toxic release inventory, which would provide us with better data on the use and release of these compounds from industrial sites, and considering adding rules to prohibit the use of certain PFAS. And then I'm not going to focus on these two too much, but there is enforcement and cleanup. These are much more focused on groundwater contamination for specific industrial sites. They're not as applicable in this situation to OWASA. At the state and regional level, there has been efforts on PFAS. So OWASA remains an active member of regional cooperative groups that conduct monitoring and research. Regional utilities are conducting monitoring as well as OWASA, and we continue to dialogue and share information with our neighboring utilities. North Carolina Division of Water Resources has been doing studies and monitoring. In 2018, there was a study focused on the Cape Fear River Basin, which included Cane Creek and University Lake, as well as other reservoirs. There's going to be additional monitoring requirements for MPDES pretreatment facilities in the Cape Fear River Basin. Monica's going to be discussing that in more detail, thankfully. I won't have to try and cover that. And there are Division of Water Resources has plans to evaluate surface water loading from biosolid land application. And finally, the Pfs Testing Network, as I mentioned previously, has been performing legislatively mandated monitoring and research. So Division of Water Resources did some monitoring in the Cape Fear River Basin in 2018. Shown in the two green stars are University Lake and Cane Creek Reservoir. There was one perfluorinated compound, PFAS, that was detected in the sample from Cane Creek Reservoir at a level comparable to the levels we're measuring. These studies, unfortunately, were limited by the very low or very high detection limits by the lab that they were using. However, DWR now has approved money to purchase an improved, their own instrument and staff to run it, and so they are anticipating better data in the future. 1,4-dioxane was not detected in any of our samples. It has not been detected in any drinking water samples as well. I'm not going to touch on 1,4-dioxane too much, but Monica will talk about it a little bit. Oh, sorry.
Question for you.
Yes.
Have they preserved those samples? Will they go back with their new equipment and new staff and reanalyze those?
I do not know, but I can reach out to Eric and ask. My guess is no, because the samples all got sent to the EPA lab in Atlanta, but I'd be happy to reach out to Eric Morris at DWR and ask.
But the new methodology will be the same as the current or the EPA's methodology that was used? That's a question.
I can ask.
Okay. What I'm asking is, can we compare these through time?
So,
but if they're different methodologies, we can't.
Yeah, that is a trick, and we will be getting to that a little bit more. We have been collecting data over time, so we have a time series, okay, which I will be presenting later in this presentation. Great. If that may answer your question.
Yeah.
DWR also performed a more intensive monitoring at Jordan Lake. This consisted of monthly sampling at Jordan Lake and the immediate watersheds. So to orient everyone on this map, the blue dot is roughly where we're standing right now, and where Jones Ferry Water Treatment Plant is. The green dot is roughly the location of the Mason Farm Wastewater Treatment Plant. And that green star there is the sample site downstream on Morgan Creek, which is influenced by our wastewater effluent, treated wastewater effluent. So there was one perfluorinated compound that was detected in the Morgan Creek and New Hope arm of Jordan Lake. It was PFBA and was detected at low levels and was not detected in the reservoir. And then there were much higher levels detected in the Haw River samples and samples in the reservoir influenced by the Haw River. So I believe 7 compounds were detected pretty consistently at those sites. The Pfs Testing Network has been performing testing or monitoring all over the state. So the North Carolina Pfs Testing Network falls under the North Carolina Policy Collaboratory, which is housed at UNC. The testing network consists of researchers from 7 universities in the state, and they are performing a whole host of different monitoring and research. The 2 items that we've bolded here, sampling surface water, drinking water supplies, i.e. reservoirs, lakes, and rivers, and wastewater influent and landfill leachate are the 2 efforts that OWASA is currently participating in. So they have been here and sampled, collected a sample from Cane Creek Reservoir. At this time, they have not collected a sample from University Lake because University Lake we were not using as a water source at the time that they came to collect the sample, but they will be back to collect that sample at some point. So I wanted to take a minute to kind of orient everyone to this graph because I'm going to be showing it a fair amount. On the y-axis is the concentration of each perfluorinated compound in parts per trillion, and along the x-axis are the compounds that were detected. They're grouped by type, so by those 2 different functional groups, and then by size. So PFBS and PFBA are the smallest, and then they increase in size from left to right within those 2 groups. And so this is the results from the Pfs Testing Network sample that was collected in May 2019, and these levels are pretty comparable to the levels we've been measuring in Cane Creek Reservoir. We did collect a paired sample at the same time that they collected the sample that we sent to our contract laboratory. And importantly, we also collected a treated drinking water sample, which is our practice every time we collect a sample from our raw water so we can see the efficacy of our treatment process. I'm not showing the health advisory level on this graph or on any of the other raw water results because the health advisory level is only applicable to treated drinking water. It does not apply to untreated raw water. So in 2018, OWASA undertook a monitoring effort for perfluorinated compounds. We sampled a whole host of different sites. We sampled each of our raw water reservoirs, so Cane Creek Reservoir, University Lake, as well as our emergency reservoir, Corey Reservoir. We collected 2 samples of our treated drinking water here at the Jones Ferry Water Treatment Plant and in our distribution system. We collected a sample of our treated wastewater effluent and a sample from Morgan Creek upstream of where the effluent is discharged. So to measure what was in the creek that is not under the influence of our treated wastewater effluent. Yes.
There it goes. Thank you. That there's no measurement method of PFAS yet for wastewater. So what method did you use?
So for all of these samples, what has been used is a modified method for the treated drinking water method. It involves internal standards and a lot of QC. We feel really good with our contract laboratory. We have also done some sampling using the limited method that's available by the EPA approved method, and we see pretty consistent results for those 18 compounds that are currently included, but we want to be able to measure more compounds. So for example, the samples we collected in 2018, they analyzed for 39 compounds, and they've actually added more. At this point, they're measuring 45 compounds. And as they continue to be able to add more compounds, we continue to request that they analyze for those compounds. At this point, even as they've added more compounds, we have not started detecting new compounds. But that is what we've been doing. Does that answer your question? Great. So I'm going to be focusing on the results from the raw water from 2018. So, and this is data that was previously presented to the board, but just as a reminder, in University Lake and Quarry Reservoir, we measured 2 of the 39 compounds, and in the sample from Cane Creek Reservoir, 11 of the 39 compounds were measured. So this is the same graph layout again with the results from University Lake, Cane Creek Reservoir, and Quarry Reservoir. I'm showing here the results in dark green from University Lake and light green is Quarry Reservoir. So we measured 2 compounds at low levels. PFOS and PFOA, again, are those 2 compounds that have been in use in production for quite a long time, although they have now been phased out of use in production. And as I said, we did measure 11 compounds in Cane Creek Reservoir, and these compounds were found at higher levels. Based on these results, we elected to pursue quarterly sampling from Cane Creek Reservoir and of our treated drinking water in 2019. So we're now at the halfway mark. So I'm going to provide an update on what we're seeing so far from the first 2 quarters of 2019. So in 2019, we've been sampling at Cane Creek Reservoir and the water treatment plant, treated drinking water. So same graph again. Gray results are those results from Cane Creek Reservoir from 2018 that we just saw. The red results are the results from that first quarter of 2019. And the yellow results are the results from the second quarter of 2019. These samples were collected at the paired time that the Pfs Testing Network was here collecting samples. So while we do see a trend of a decrease from some of these compounds, I want to reiterate again, these compounds are being measured at parts per trillion. And so these are pretty small differences and we don't have the full data set yet. So we really want to wait and see what the full data set looks like before we start drawing any conclusions based on trends. Yes, Jody?
So are these quarters calendar years?
Yeah, calendar year quarters. So I believe they were collected in February and May. The next sampling effort will be in August, I think. Yeah, I can do math. Other questions?
Do we know whether or not the biosolids that were being applied adjacent to Tom's Creek were by the city of Burlington has now stopped? My information was that they no longer apply on that site just north of Tom's Creek at Cane Creek.
Yeah, we've heard the same information that they're not being applied, but those properties are still permitted to be applied on.
Understood, they're still permitted. Do we know whether they're ceasing the present application, whether they plan to continue that? I said that backwards. Whether they may start again?
And we don't know that information.
So we don't know whether to anticipate a difference in measurements at Cane Creek based on that activity, because we don't know whether it might reach.
And Monica, you might mention for Class A biosolids, there is no reporting requirements.
Absolutely,
right?
yes.
Could you say a little bit about that?
Yeah, so with Class A standards, it's it's a higher quality biosolid. You're not required. You can it can be applied anywhere. You just have to the utilities have to record who they gave it to and how much. So we wouldn't be aware of any Class A biosolids that would be applied in the watershed.
Does it make sense to collect samples nearby the entry point of the flow of Tom's Creek into the reservoir, as opposed to at other sites in the reservoir, or maybe in addition to other sites in Cane Creek?
So that is one of the options that was presented to the board when we discussed what the 2019 sampling would look like. And staff recommendation was that we focus on what we're seeing at the influent at the intake, because as far as actions go, what we want to know is what we're treating, what's coming into the plant, and activities such as what you're discussing fall more into the purview of research, which DWR has said they're going to do. Pfs Testing Network is doing some of that, and we really look to the regulators and researchers to guide us on that. That answer. We're good. Are there other questions? Yes, John.
First, I'd like to say that was really an excellent report. Very clear, very thorough. Thank you.
Thank you.
I noticed that a lot of the activity is related to, in terms of these earlier regulatory efforts, focuses on two of this family of PFAS compounds, PFOS and PFOA.
Correct.
Is that because they are more prevalent in the environment or because they're potentially more harmful to health or some combination of the two?
Neither. The focus began on PFOS and PFOA because those were the two major perfluorinated compounds that were in use when the activities began, the regulatory activities and focus began. So we just have more data available on them because they've been in use for quite a bit longer. I can go back to the slide on. Oh, wow. There. On PFOS and PFOA have been in production since the 1950s. The newer compounds, the smaller compounds, were actually created in some ways in response to the PFOA stewardship program to phase out PFOS and PFOA in the hopes that these compounds, because they were shorter, would be less of a problem. Unfortunately, at this time, it appears that that may have been an unfortunate substitution, and that's part of why the EPA is focusing on, is there a better way to approach the PFAS as a whole, as a broader class, or as several broader classes. Unfortunately, as I think I've discussed a fair amount, the chemistry of these compounds is different, and so it can be hard to lump them together into broad classes.
Well, just, I guess you've explained that these two, PFOS and PFOA, they were invented earlier, they've been in use longer, so they do seem to be more prevalent in the environment, maybe just because they've...
I think
that's what our monitoring shows.
I think it really depends on where you're looking. If you talk to people in Wilmington, they might have a different answer.
Okay, thank you.
All right, so, sorry, we're just gonna go through a whole lot of slides. Okay. So, yes, all right. So here are all of the results we have to date in Cane Creek Reservoir, which again is a raw water source. It hasn't gone through any treatment. So again, I'm not showing a health advisory level. But as I've mentioned, for each of these sampling events, we did collect a paired sample of our treated drinking water. So this graph shows the results from our paired treated drinking water samples. And what we see, I'm just going to go back again for a second, is that consistent with the available research, our treatment process is effective at removing some but not all of these compounds. Shown in the green circles are those two compounds, PFOS and PFOA, that we were just discussing. They've been in production longer. They're also the ones that have a health advisory level. So this next graph I want to show you is the sum of those two compounds from each of these monitoring efforts shown relative to that health advisory level of 70 parts per trillion. And what we see is that our results are less than 1/3 of that regulatory, it's not a regulatory limit, it's a health advisory level. Yes, Rashir.
What's the detection limit for all those compounds?
Yeah, so it actually varies by compound, but the lab that we use can detect most of these compounds between, the limit is either 2 or 5 parts per trillion, depending on the compound. So very low. Yes, Bruce.
So the compounds that get filtered out with our system, where does that goes into biosolids that then get distributed someplace?
This isn't biosolids because we're on the treated drinking water side, but it ends up in solids.
Solids.
It ends up in solids.
And where does that go?
It goes to McGill and is turned into compost.
And it's land applied.
And it is land applied.
I'm struggling with this speaker. You mentioned that these compounds don't degrade. They don't metabolize either. Okay.
They do undergo some transformations and then they end up as a terminal product, but it's still a perfluorinated compound. It's still carbons and fluorines. they really don't break down. There is ongoing research on the effects of incineration to find out how good those are at destroying some of these compounds. But as I mentioned, AFFF, that firefighting foam is used for jet fuel fires. So these compounds are very, very stable. And unfortunately, unfortunately isn't the right word, disposal of biosolids and solids from drinking water is not optional, and there's only a handful of options. They can be land applied, they can be land filled, or they can be incinerated. And going back to that past slide on routes that these compounds take to get into the environment, solid waste is another route. And I want to go back and Monica's going to get into some of this a little bit more, but some of the efforts that DWR is undertaking on the wastewater side is looking more at some of the actual sources, the upstream sources of these compounds. And water, wastewater, these are all biosolids, these are all conveyances, but none of these are the actual sources. And because these compounds are so stable, until we as a society start addressing where these compounds come from originally, we're faced with the task of removing compounds at very, very low levels. These compounds are parts per trillion, and we're trying to remove them, which is a very difficult and costly task. So, as I said, our levels for the two compounds for which there is currently a health advisory level is less than 1/3 of that level. And, go back. Now I'm going to turn it over to Monica, who's going to talk more. Thank you.
So Monica Dotson, Wastewater Treatment and Biosolids Recycling Manager. So as Katie mentioned earlier, we began monitoring for the PFAS compounds in 2018. We monitored our source waters, we monitored our drinking water, but we also took 2 samples, one sample of Morgan Creek, which is upstream where the wastewater treatment plant discharges, and then the second sample was from our treated wastewater effluent. And of the 39 compounds that were monitored for, there were 8 that were already present in Morgan Creek upstream of our discharge, and then there was 8 plus 1 additional one that was present in our treated wastewater effluent. And so I guess it's been a couple weeks ago, I had the opportunity to go down to Wilmington and attend a public forum that the Pfs Network held for the community. And they went through that whole list of all the studies that they're looking at with the PFAS compounds. And it's really impressive, the work that these 7 universities are coming together to do. And we really look forward to learning more from the results of their studies. Katie mentioned that we're participating in the monitoring of our source water, but we're also voluntarily participating in a study where they're looking at landfill leachate and wastewater influent. So when products or materials are disposed of at a landfill, the water that percolates through those materials is collected, and it's called landfill leachate. And typically that's sent or discharged to the wastewater treatment plants. So we do accept landfill leachate from Orange County's landfill. And so this team within the PFAS network will be looking at the landfill leachate and the PFAS compounds within it in comparison to our wastewater influent. So back in May, I had the opportunity to attend a technical session on emerging compounds held by the Division of Water Resources. And they talked about, the studies that Katie had talked about earlier, and, like she mentioned, in particular, 1,4-dioxane and PFAS compounds were at higher levels in the Cape Fear River Basin. And so, like Katie also mentioned, the industries are the originators of these compounds. And so a lot of times these industries actually will discharge directly to the wastewater treatment facilities. So the Division of Water Resources is requiring 25 utilities in the Cape Fear River Basin with pretreatment programs to begin investigative monitoring of their wastewater influent for 21 of these PFAS compounds. And so a utility is required to have a pretreatment program if they have what are considered to be significant industrial users. So they would be industrial users that would discharge large amounts of a substance that may negatively impact or could potentially impact wastewater processes. So typically, these utilities or these industries would be required to pre-treat their discharge before they send it to the wastewater facility. OWASA does not have any significant industrial users in our service area. Therefore, we don't have a pre-treatment program and we're not required to participate in this monitoring. However, we believe it's important to know what's in our wastewater. So we are going to begin our own investigative monitoring. For the utilities that are required to participate in this monitoring, they're required to collect samples beginning in July for 3 consecutive months. And then depending on those results, they may be required to go out into their service area and start to identify the potential sources of where these compounds could be coming from. And then once those sources are identified, then they'll work with these industries to try to reduce or even eliminate these compounds in their discharges. So, you know, Katie had talked a lot about this earlier. You know, there's no EPA approved methods right now for analysis in wastewater. The EPA has plans to provide a approved method by the end of the year. So what, like she talked about, what the laboratories will do is they'll take these drinking water methods and they'll modify them. But laboratories don't always modify the test in the same manner, so it can create some inconsistencies in the results, which can make it pretty difficult sometimes to compare the results. The state recognizes this as a challenge, so they've selected a method that they're requiring these utilities to use. It's a Department of Defense method that has some pretty rigorous quality assurance and quality control standards. So this is the method they're requiring all these utilities use, and this is the method that OWASA will use in monitoring our wastewater. We're actually going to begin, and I failed to mention this earlier, the leachate study is going to, that testing is going to start next week. And so we're actually going to start monitoring our wastewater influent using this method next week as well. And we'll actually be able to compare the Pfs testing to our testing with the DoD method. And we're going to monitor our wastewater influent starting next week through September. And then, of course, depending on those results, you know, we'll you know, decide what we'll do with that. Let's see. Yep, that's it. So I thought there was one more thing I wanted to say. Our future steps will continue to be we'll continue to proactively address unregulated compounds through research, through regional cooperation, support local and national resource, and remain open and honest communication with our customers. We'll continue to support the research efforts, remain abreast of the latest results and recommendations, and continue to communicate and coordinate with our neighbor utilities and state agencies. So we want to reiterate that OWASA's drinking water is safe and meets all federal and state regulations, including those health advisory levels. OWASA participates in the EPA program for unregulated compounds, and OWASA supports regional and national research, including unregulated compounds. And of course, we invite our customers to contact us if they have any questions or comments. So Katie and I will be happy to address any questions you all may have.
Okay. So I know there's no action required, but are there any additional board comments and questions? Jody?
I have one comment. That last slide where you list all these things, I think if you're presenting that to the public, you might want to consider adding another bullet that says OWASA is doing more monitoring than is required.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Janya?
Monica, I think you said that we are processing the landfill leachate. This is from the Eubanks Road?
We do accept landfill leachate.
And I wasn't, I mean, I've been on the board a long time. I had no idea this was happening. So how does that work? Is that, is that into our sewer system connected to Eubanks Road, or is it trucked in?
Yeah, there's a direct connection into the sewer system.
Okay, and so obviously it'd be difficult unless we're not doing any testing. We don't know what's in that leachate.
No, but that's the testing that'll begin next week. So we're
they're going to include our.
Yep. Yeah. So we're actually going to meet the researchers out there on Thursday, and there's a manhole that we can access that sample from.
And what kind of volume of you know, I guess it's liquids, it's a leachate, right? So what kind of volume is that? And I'm curious how it do we bill the county for this
Yeah.
service or any, that's not for you, but
I don't.
Yeah, we have a sewer use ordinance that governs, the quality of the waste. And I don't know, Mary, do you know about how we handle the billing? I mean, they used to truck it to us.
And that's what I was going to say, to give you an idea of volume, Mary Dar, Director of Engineering and Planning. Before we had a permanent connection to the sewer, it was trucked. So it's a volume that they could store on site and then occasionally truck it to our sewer system. So
it's not that big.
it's not that big. We do a flat, I think based on the years that they did the trucking, that's how we based the monthly fee on. We can certainly look up what that is.
Yeah, we can
but
report back.
It's a smaller volume of discharge. It's not a large percentage of the total treatment plant flow by any means.
So it's just treated as another industrial waste, and there's sort of parameters around what we're willing to accept, and then we have charges related to that. So
Yeah, I don't know if there's a high strength surcharge or not. Well, I don't think there is, but in the sewer use ordinance, there is a catch-all. Because thousands of compounds, so we don't list all of those, and we don't test for all those. But there is language in the sewer use ordinance that if something's found that affects the treatment process or the quality of treated effluent or quality of treated biosolids, we have the authority to say, stop, clean it up. But of course, the Orange County's not adding it.
Yeah.
It's part of the waste stream from society. And of course, that landfill is closed now and it is covered. And so, rain now, most of it runs off, doesn't percolate through, but there's still some moisture, within. So it'll continue to produce leachate for many, many years to come. But over time, that volume should continue to decrease.
A couple things. One, on that sewer use ordinance, I know there was some talk or looking into revamping that at some point.
Yeah, so we've, it's under review. We've talked to a number of our neighbors, utility neighbors. We wanted to make sure that it's consistent with what, compare theirs to ours, make sure it's consistent with that, also ensuring that it's consistent with state regulations, but that is still under review now.
Okay. So I can I think with Bob's question, it's kind of leaning to where I'm kind of leaning to as well as, we kind of have an idea of what is causing the issue, but we're not testing the actual, we're only testing the influent to the wastewater treatment at Cane Creek. We're not testing up the creek. But what I'm wondering about is, what would OWASA be comfortable doing in terms of talking to the city of Burlington, or talking to the airport, or talking to the firefighting academy, just about gathering information about their PFAS, PFOA usage at those areas?
Yeah, I think that's what the state's doing now with their efforts to address, the industrial sources. So Burlington is in the Cape Fear River Basin, so they would be required to participate in the monitoring that the state's holding. So, we feel it's best to leave that in the state's hands.
Okay.
And I'm pretty sure they have significant industrial dischargers into their wastewater stream, so they are going to be.
Yeah, absolutely. So that we're really encouraged by the route that the state's taken with this.
Okay, so that's good. So that's kind of actually taking it out of our hands completely, which is, or a lot of it at least, which would have gone possibly sticky, but so okay, I really appreciate this presentation.
Yeah, thank you.
I might add that the airport at Burlington is in a completely different subbasin to the west of the subbasin at Cane Creek, the reservoir. Anything that ran off any use of these compounds for firefighting or practice at the Burlington Airport would go around the subbasin to the west of Cane Creek.
Yeah, but it would.
Now, that's not to say that I still have the other questions I have. I'm just saying, with respect to the airport, use, that probably is not impactful to this, of the King Creek.
Just one suggestion, the source slides, you showed 2 slides about sources, where they come from, and then, yeah, there was a bunch of arrows and, so like a second slide or something like that. I mean, and then the other one about when they were started use and started in production. Yeah, that's one. Those aren't on your website. It'd be nice maybe to put them on there, because that's the first thing I thought of too, and that's some of the questions. Where are they coming from? So, so those 2 slides, and then there was another one that, yeah, that one, that one.
Great.
Those would be nice on the website, I think.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah.
Is the state doing any testing on the Haw River? I know that doesn't come through us, but does go to Jordan Lake.
Yes.
So the research that DWR, the monitoring DWR was doing on Jordan Lake did focus on the immediate watersheds, which included the Haw, and also the Pfs Testing Network sampling of all surface water sources is including the Haw at several points, because the Haw is a source water for several water utilities.
Because Alamance County's landfill is right on the Haw River.
There are many sources to the Haw River.
One other question, just following up with what Bob was just saying, is the stormwater collected from the airport or the firefighting academy connected to their wastewater system? Do we know if it's a CS combined sewer or anything like that? I'm just curious.
I don't know for sure.
Yeah. Okay.
Any additional questions, comments? Okay, thank you. So now we're moving on to review our board work session. Are there any members of the public that would wish to make a comment on these? Okay. And so Ed, you and me, we're gonna go ahead and start to see if there are any requests from the board members, comments, board members or committees, staff requests?
It would be staff's request and recommendation that you cancel your June 27th board meeting. We have, I know, 3 board members that are unable to attend, and we also, since you batted 100% today on the agenda items, we don't have any important business matters, so we'd ask that you consider canceling the June 27th meeting. And we also think for the bit of a summer recess and we don't have any pressing business matters, you could also tonight, if you wanted to, cancel the July 25th and the August 8th meeting, also with the understanding if something came up, we certainly would be in contact with the chair and the board if something necessitated, rescheduling those, or you could also wait until your July 11th meeting and decide about those, about the July 25th, August 8th meeting. But tonight, we do think you could act if you agree to cancel the June 27th meeting.
Are there any questions on that? So we can just go ahead and cancel that one. Would we also like to discuss canceling the July 25th and August 8th? Okay. Okay. So we'll go ahead and cancel all. So we'll go ahead and we can cancel all 3 of those meetings.
We might be called into one of those dates if something
needed.
urgent comes in.
So then on page 8.2 is the agenda as we know it today for July 11th. Some things I'd want to call your attention to. Of course, we expect Bruce Runberg to take his oath that evening, if not before. There's a award of a Kensington Drive, Barclay Road water main replacement project. We had a mandatory pre-bid conference. I understand only 2 contractors showed up, so it's very likely we won't get 3 bids, and then we'll rebid. And I know Allison is the project manager on that, right? And Vishnu, do you want to talk a little bit about what might lie ahead and some of the uncertainties involved in that project. And, you know, you might remember Kensington Drive, you know, some time ago, we had a couple breaks, a lot of sediment ended up in Eastwood Lake, and some folks were quite upset about that. And we've had way too many main breaks here in the last couple of months on Barclay Road. So we've packaged those two projects together, and we're moving as fast as we can to get them under construction. Vishnu?
Yeah, so Allison's done a lot of work to really accelerate the pace of the Barclay water main replacement, and we're going just about as fast as we can on that. She did include that, add that to the Kensington Drive water main replacement project, and as Ed mentioned, we had a pre-bid meeting today that there were only two bidders who showed up, and this is despite Allison doing quite a bit of outreach to contractors to try to understand the potential for us to get bids on that project. So we are making some adjustments. We still do expect to be able to award, present a recommendation for award at the July 11th work session. That will be Allison presenting that item, and so we're targeting getting under contract in August and work starting sometime in September.
What's the engineer's estimate of what those two should be together?
So, in fact, we accelerated this so much, we're working on that number. I have a kind of a preliminary number which I used for budgeting purposes for the CIP budget, but we're kind of refining that. Once we have that information, I'll share that with the board.
And Linda mentioned this earlier, that the Barclay Road is where we had a community meeting on site, and that was quite well attended. I know Allison, Vishnu, Linda, and Jesse Duclaw, I think we're all there, and yeah, and we're finding those are really effective way to, you know, take the meeting to them, you know, and at their front doors, and I think that really helped a lot, explained, you know, why are they breaking, what are we doing about it, and providing some assurance that we know work needs to be done.
Yeah, we'll continue to keep that community informed.
Okay. Also on July 11th is our next, what I guess, triennial update. And last time, you'll recall, you received a presentation from the Employee Resource Group. On July 11th, you'll be hearing from our recruitment group with some of the work they've been doing. So we look forward to sharing that with you. And Mary Dar will provide you an update on our water main prioritization model. A lot of work has been done. We're really pleased with the consultant on this. We've been sharing that information with UNC hospitals. And it's on schedule, and there's a lot in it, so that it might be, I don't know if it'll eclipse the Katie Monica presentation, but it's quite involved, but as you know, it's quite important. Also, we'll be talking about the June 20th meeting with our neighbors out at Cane Creek, and you know, I do expect a pretty spirited meeting on June 20th. And it may be that we have some folks that will also attend the July 12th board meeting to comment. But, you know, that'll be our chance to together debrief, you know, what we heard, what we learned. Are there? Yeah, I'm sorry. Did I say June? Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, our meeting on July 11th will be the opportunity to debrief the June 20th community meeting and decide whether, you know, to stay the course that we're on and the schedule and the steps we've laid out, or is it appropriate to adjust that? So, you know, that could take a good little bit of our time also on July 11th. So. And as far as action items, there were a number of questions we need to get back to you regarding PFAS, PFOA. And Todd owes the board a report card on the savings, kind of the bottom line, now that we've implemented the Aqua Vista. And do you happen to know what our latest number is as far as percent participation in the portal? I know we've been extremely pleased with that. And
last I heard, we were approaching 20%. Still headed north, so we're expecting we're going to be around 25%. So, and then we'll level off a little bit. But it's been very impressive. We've even gotten a lot of inquiries from WaterSmart, the people that do the portal, about how quickly the uptake's been, and they've been. They've been shocked by that. They said it takes a lot longer to reach these kind of levels of participation. So very pleased with how it's gone so far.
Okay. May I comment on that? That sounds wonderful. I think it might be helpful to track active users also. I don't know if our technology vendor has sort of benchmarks for that, but I think that would be a really useful metric.
Right. Yeah.
But I know you also share some metrics just about the numbers of trucks we roll and how that, I mean, it's just remarkable,
right. We've had
the improvement in that.
Yeah, just all the things that that we were sold in the package, it's all come true. So haven't really seen anything yet that where we say, well, that was didn't really happen the way we thought it was going to. So it's all working out very well.
And I'd be happy to answer any questions about the 12-month schedule. There are a number of things later in the year related to our forest management work that I think we might change or amend down the road, and it's too early to have that conversation tonight. But on July 11th, when we debrief the community meeting, we'll also be looking at the task and schedule ahead and adjust those accordingly. But I know I said this a couple hours ago, but the meeting we had this week with our partners, they're very smart, they're very capable, they're supportive of our approach, what we're doing, and I know they'll add great value, not just on the 20th, but as we move forward. So when we get to identify the 3 or 4 top tracks and we work with neighbors and we have a plan from our consultant, we're going to have the team weigh in and review it from the different perspectives, and so each one should really be well baked and set up for success. So we're really encouraged, and I think the board, I think you'll hear a lot from people. So we want to have you prepared for that, and I know, as you always are, you'll be very approachable, respectful, and patient in hearing that out, and I know you'll make a good informed decision at the appropriate time. But we'd also like to set it up where once this is up and running, it's a staff program, we're selecting sites, we're managing it, we're not always, back to the board on this. But at this stage, it's really important to have your involvement. You're setting the policies, setting the guidance for the program, and then, once we're up and running, then it'll be our job to sustain it and maintain it. And that's all I had to share with you. Did I forget anything, Andy?
Okay, thank you. So now we're moving on to our next agenda.
Can I add one thing? I meant to say it while Todd was up here. You all know that I enjoy having breakfast at Sutton's Drugstore every morning, in part because there's such a community dialogue that goes on in there informally about things that are important. One of the characters who's there every day is Jim Crisp, who's now 90 years old and has sold insurance and played piano in this community for 60 years or more, and is a wonderful curmudgeon there at the county. And generally, when he calls me over, it's to complain about something that he knows I'm involved in. This morning, he said, I couldn't believe it. He said, I got a phone call from OWASA, and they said I had a leak in my house. And I went and looked, and I did have a leak. He said, I can't believe they did that. He said it's one of the best things they've ever done. And so instead of fending off jokes and criticisms I usually do when we talk, he asked me to deliver to the board his remarks about what a wonderful thing that system is. And I said, I gave him Todd's extension number. I don't know if he'll call me. I actually used the portal, and I went to the portal and checked on how to figure out why my toilet adjacent to my bedroom, usually about the time I'm going to sleep, gurgles. And even as I go to sleep, seems to moan a little bit. And so if you go to the website, there's a woman named Sarah.
That's right.
And Sarah will tell you all about the innards of your toilet and tell you how to figure out why it gurgles or moans or whatever yours might be doing. And she was exactly right about mine. And I've never had anybody be able to explain how all that worked in a way that I could understand, but she did. So I joined Jim in saying I think it's a great thing, and congratulations, and I'm glad it's in place.
Okay, thank you. So, election of officers. So Bob, you were going to give us a brief summary.
You will remember that you nominated candidates for election of officers in your May 23rd meeting. You will remember that we previously advised that 5 votes are necessary to elect anyone. And so Andy has responsibility for managing the election as the clerk to the board. And she has prepared ballots that show the names of the candidates for each office. And she's going to distribute those ballots. And we'll ask you to vote first for one of the candidates for the chair. She will then collect the ballots and she will count them. And if somebody has 5 votes, then they are elected. If nobody has 5 votes, then there will be a second round. And in that round, somebody is going to get 5 votes, I'm going to guess. So if you would go ahead and mark your ballots. I remind you that the ballots are public documents. They have to be maintained, and please initial them with your initials are fine, but you could also write your name on it if you wanted to. They are public documents and they're maintained in the archives of the OWASA.
Can I have a quick, I have a quick question. Is this at all editable at this point?
No, those are the candidates. You've changed the bylaws so that they now require that the candidates be nominated at the meeting prior to the election. So when you say edited, it would be my view that you couldn't add a candidate if a candidate wanted to come off the list. I don't think we can force anybody to be an officer who doesn't want to be, but the reason for nominations before the meeting where the election is so that you'll be able to make your minds up in the succeeding next several weeks. I think that's all I need to say about it. I will remind you that your bylaws say one thing about officers succeeding themselves. Your bylaws still permit officers succeeding. There's an unwritten rule of practice for the last several elections, including this one. You have discussed not having present officers succeed themselves. Yinka is a candidate for election because the bylaws permit her to be, and the bylaws permit you to elect her if you wish. They don't prohibit your election. So I hope that it's intended not to be confusing, but it is also an acknowledgement that because there is that conflict between your practice and your bylaws, it may be a little confusing. You may vote for any who are on the ballot. So, Andy, did you collect the ballot?
While we're waiting, Bob, we used to have something like called nominations from the floor. So our bylaws have eliminated that change.
Well, you're allowed to nominate from the floor in the meeting prior to the meeting where the election is.
Yeah.
But the bylaws now say that the nominees will be nominated in the meeting prior to the election.
Yeah.
There aren't any. You used to allow nominations from the floor at the election, but
For example, the public couldn't nominate someone.
no, this
in
is an
theory.
election solely voted on by the board,
Okay.
nominated by the.
And the board has elected Ray DuBose as chair of the board. Congratulations.
Ray, and Ray will become the chair at the July meeting.
Good luck with that July 11 meeting. I don't know. You were reading between the lines of what how Ed was describing that, were you?
Andy will now distribute the ballots for vice chair, and we'll do it again. I'll mention while she tabulates that last night, the Chapel Hill Town Council made appointments to various boards and commissions. They did it as the last item on their agenda after 11 o'clock. And they did it by way of announcing who had been appointed. The election was apparently by some sort of balloting device that's unknown. The public had no way of knowing who voted for whom. And I found it to be extraordinary. So what we do here complies entirely with the open meeting for that reason, because the disappointed applicants last night had no way of knowing why they were not selected, especially on those commissions where there were only the number of nominees as open seat. So that was an unusual result last night. So I'm sort of proud of the way we do it.
All right, and the board has elected Ruchir Vora as vice chair of the board.
Congratulations.
Congratulations.
And now we will do the secretary. John.
Steps. The board elected Bruce Bohm secretary. Congratulations.
Okay, so that concludes our elections of officers, and I just wanted to say congratulations to the three of you for your new positions. And so we've already done the key action items for tonight. And so without further objection, the board will continue in a closed session for the purposes of discussing a personnel matter.